I've heard is that the police reflect the culture of the people that they work for. So, in the case of Ferguson, doesn't seem quite right, and Staten Island could be right. But here in San Francisco, how do you see us making sure that we're all, the citizens, the public, the police department, are all on the same page as far as the culture we want to see, what we want to see in community, in policing across the board? How do we all kind of get together and say, this is what we expect and we won't accept anything less? Have you got any ideas?
Well, under the leadership of Supervisor Mercury, we did an audit. We had a community policing audit done, and it came up with many, I can't remember how many, 42, I think 42 or more points that what we needed to strive for. I know at some point under his leadership, we forced the department to really enact that. The question is it still going on? Is it still being enacted? And that's something maybe we should go back and look at, you know. What are the best practices for community policing?
Tisha, do you agree with that, or you see some other ways to get that done, to make sure the community knows that that's even there, because I didn't know it was there, so to make sure that the information gets out there?
I think that it would be great if the police department could go into the community and have a day where they give this information to the community and provide some kind of like more festivals and activities and things like that, block parties. I go to school in New York because I'm in grad school there, but when you have a block party, the police officer will stay there with the fire truck that usually comes. In Brooklyn, that's how they have block parties, and you make the request for the block party through the police department, and that ensures that the police officer is there and he's hanging out with the community during this event. So having more recreational activities with the community would be ideal. Having more basketball games with the community would be great too. And you know, the Richmond police chief, he marched with Black Richmond community members in California with a sign that said Black Lives Matter. And that picture went viral because he is a white male police chief stating unapologetically that he agrees that Black Lives Matter and that we need to, as a police department, pay attention to the way that we treat Black and brown people when we go out in police. And so I think that having more sensitivity training and letting that be okay to express that Black Lives Matter, and the way that we run our department is going to be reflective of that, and the way that we interact with the community is going to be reflective of that.
Stevon, would you like to comment?
Yeah, well, I think the sharing of success stories between that the police department actually have accomplished is we don't really hear about. So that's something that we need to see more of. I know that there are elected officials and police officers working really closely in communities to work with families, but we don't hear about those stories. One thing that Tisha just brought up that I think that is a comparison to our city, I haven't seen or heard our police chief or our mayor say anything about Black Lives Matter or what happened in Ferguson. Not a letter saying, I'm sorry for your loss. Not silent, absolutely silent. And so I'm still waiting to hear something from his office or our police chief. I do think our police chief has been incredible at showing up to things when he is questioned after Alex was killed. He was at Flint Elementary taking questions from the community. That was a very tense moment, but he showed up when there was an assembly put on at Mission High School by students, and Mike Brown's father came. Chief Sir was there. So I think if it's going to be a person in a leadership role that can really work to mend some of these relationships, he's definitely shown that he's willing to show up and have conversations. It comes down to the people on the ground, right? And that mistrust is just so deep. So I think one thing that I think would be really beneficial that we should look into is a requirement around community service time with all police officers in the communities that they serve. I think that's like a very reasonable thing to, you know, around the cost and all that kind of stuff, we can sort of work that out. But if we had something to say, 10%, 50%, 20% of time is committed to relationship building activities not related to policing at all, where people don't have on their guns, and you know, it's paid time for officers, right? Because that can translate into some really beneficial relationships. So I don't know what the likelihood of that is.
They do a lot of volunteer time. I don't know if they get a lot of voiceover, but they do a lot of volunteer, but it doesn't mean you can't do more. I agree.
Okay, we have.
Well, just what Steve and Tisha are describing, getting basically police in the community on kind of a social, could the police commission require something like that?
Yeah, we
Apart
can.
from volunteerism?
We certainly can encourage it. I mean, we can't interfere with the chief, but the chief, what we need, a lot of the departments, a lot of the different stations do a lot of community policing, and they are involved in a lot of community events, especially with children, and they go into the schools and stuff. It's just not publicized as much, and so maybe, I think what Stevan is saying is get the word out. And then look at what we have done and see, I'm sure we can do more.
Okay, there was a
Can I
question.
also,
Oh.
to this, the police commission does not govern the sheriff's department, since we are elected and the police is appointed. But again, what I would do is make a case to the public, to the community, that I think the police commission should not limit itself, nor the board of supervisors, nor the people, in looking at all the assets of what law enforcement has to offer in San Francisco. There's 20 agencies in San Francisco of local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. We're ground zero, an epicenter for one of the most well-staffed agencies of any city in the state of California, and yet you hear really SFPD and a little bit of others. I believe that our own department, the sheriff's department, is evolving because of a declining jail population and other initiatives that we're taking that I think we can help in this larger discussion. I'll give you an example. Station transfer units. We just ended a 6-month pilot. You may or may not know about this, but we are helping the Mission and Tenderloin Police Department stations by, instead of them, when they arrest somebody and they have to put them in a holding cell in their station, like in this station, and then they come down and book them in our county jail, I'll send our deputies in a wagon and we'll go do it for you. Therefore alleviating the many hours per day that it requires of an officer to come down to County Jail 1 for the booking of that. Now there are 10 district police stations, and I decided that we'll do this for free, for gratis. I'm not getting any money for it. I didn't ask Mayor Lee for any money. We said from July to January, we'll do a pilot, and we produced all the empirical data that proves this is a win-win for the taxpayers, for the police, and we're willing to do it. And what that does is it frees up resources of the district stations so that they don't have to be saddled with this other stuff, and they can return to their other, more pressing duties. This did not get discussed at the commission. I unilaterally brokered this with the chief himself, and yet it didn't get any ink in the press whatsoever. That is a real economical strategy in talking about how you look at the collective assets of what exists and how we might be able to divvy it up back into the community. I call it community reinvestment.
Thank you. There was a question in the back, the gentleman with the
Hi, thank
pretty
you.
jacket.
One second, everybody. I have a couple points, but just in case I don't get to the second one, I'll just mention one. So, the area of technology, right? I hear about the video topic. Obviously, militarization is technology, but in the other direction, right? I'm a little puzzled, and I'd like to understand maybe if it has been looked into any detail, really using technology to avoid a lot of these Fergusons. I mean, there's got to be a way, in fact, I'm pretty sure there is a way, that you can be 100% sure a person does not have a gun, or does have a gun. Right?
I think,
And has that been looked at by anybody in this country? Because there's sensors, I mean, the technology today is unbelievable, right? So, go ahead.
I forgot the child's name, Tamar Rice?
Tamir Rice in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So the officer described that young boy who was 12 years old as being 26-year-old monster. So he saw him as this giant black Hulk-like figure, and he was a 12-year-old boy with a toy gun. And so even if we have this technology that would allow like something like the airport or something where people would have the ability to see through people's clothing or something like that, if it came to something like that, you still have that aspect where police officers, especially in Ferguson and rural areas, don't recognize the humanity of Black people. That's what it comes down to. They don't see us, and that's why it's easy for them to murder us, because they see us as this Hulk-like creature. And I think that that also goes back to the accountability in how we train police officers, how we screen people who are applying for these jobs. Having a weapon is a huge deal. You wouldn't let a person be in the military if they have mental health problems, if they have PTSD, all of these different things. And I think that there should be more enforcement within the police department for how they screen people who are hiring to get these jobs. And yeah, so I think technology wouldn't be the solution if the mentality hasn't changed.
Steph?
Yeah, I've been feeling for a long time that a lot of people get into the role of the police officers and their ego gets hold of them. A lot of what you guys are saying makes sense, but how do you get them to really accept it?
You know, I mean, one of the things I remember from the community policing, well, first of all, if you live in the community, you don't fear the community. And I think a lot of times the reaction you have is a fear, and that's important. But one of the things that we learned about the community policing is that it doesn't get the promotions, it doesn't get the glory that it should get. It should from the top down, it should be the most prized asset for the officer if he can be active in his community, know his community, and really excel at community policing. Those are the people who need to be raised up, lifted up, celebrated, and brought through. And it comes from the top down, but then you build it from the bottom up.
Do you think there's any way that if someone didn't fit that you say you can't be a policeman?
Well, those persons don't, yeah, they either don't get promoted or, you know, they don't make it in the department. But I just think that value, where you put the values in your department and how you reward your people is one of the things that needs to be changed.
But that sets it up for a confrontation with the union. And so one of the strongest unions in San Francisco is the Police Officers Association. And I have to deal with our own unions internally within our department too. So as a department head, that's a fact of life. So if in fact that you're talking about a principle or value or strategy that community would like, but the union does not, then who mediates that concern? And I think that that's where the other organs of city government come in, like a stronger mayor, you know, who has, I think, a more robust and inclusive vision of community policing that does not exist today, and the supervisors that govern each of these districts to help mediate those concerns. But frankly, my take is everybody's scared. Everybody's afraid of the weight that will then be applied if you don't agree with some of these more powerful institutions.
And I think that we saw that with the New York City Police Department. The mayor spoke out against the police brutality happening, and the New York police chief said that he's turning his back on the mayor. And so that shows a complete and utter disrespect for the person who's supposed to be running the city. And a lot of people also said that it's because the mayor has an African American wife and a biracial child. And so he's looked at as a Black person by association. And so just that the sentiment of if you speak out against police officers, like with the football players who have been, or athletes who've been active within the movement, and they get fined by the NFL, and I think it was, I don't know if it was in Cleveland or a place like that, but the police chief asked for the football player to apologize.
St. Louis Rams.
It also happened in another area too, to one person who wore a Black Lives Matter t-shirt in the St. Louis Rams. That happened with those 3 individuals. But these 2 different police departments asked those athletes to apologize for demanding justice. And no one should ever have to say sorry for demanding justice. And I think that's like what we should be addressing when we're talking about how do we create policy change, is how do we take that power away from the police department to feel like they have the right to tell someone to say sorry for demanding justice.
So you know, is that policeman who did the murder in Ferguson, Missouri, but then there was one who shot somebody, it was in the paper about a week and a half ago, and just left him on the street.
Yeah, I think, back to your original question about how you get them to have it stick, you're talking about work that requires changing hearts and minds. And it's an interesting parallel with the work that happens in education, because we have these same issues around effective teachers and teachers really understanding their students, and seeing how their bias may play out in the practices when they're educating young people. And so what we see institutionally is racialized outcomes that are disproportionately affecting Black and brown people in education, as we are and policing. But in addition to that, one big point around the way that we shifted our discussions on race, we made it unacceptable in this country to be racist, right? So we started to hide our biases, and so we don't talk about race as openly and comfortably as we used to. So we hide behind the way that we introduce policy or the way that we forgive certain actions. It's very easy to demonize the police, and especially to create this narrative around isolated incidents that are egregious, but it does come down to our policymakers, right? The police do what they're charged with doing, and people that are concerned about their political futures make decisions based on the sentiments of what's happening in their area, so it comes down to that, like, what are we demanding of our elected officials around leadership and taking courageous stances and being willing to get their backs turned on them in front of the country, right, in order to make it now unacceptable to shoot a Black child and have no recourse. Like, that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is doing to me. It is creating this amount of discomfort across the country that makes people see how unacceptable it is for this to happen. And so that becomes a catalyst for people having the courage to have a new policy direction. There's more I want to say too about how this plays out around the overpopulation of our jails, and we have major Republican candidates now talking about decreasing our prison population. So it is a great time to really have some major sea shifts in terms of the way that we charge people with policing. So it's now time for someone to fill a void and run for something meaningful and take a stand.